You guys see that all right?
Yes.
Looks good.
All right. Well, thanks for having me. My name is Kramer Winingham. I'm a program director at Arrowhead Center. I work on the economic development programs and also economic research. Like I said, this is a presentation I developed about a month ago for a group from FEMA. They're interested in the impact of COVID-19 in New Mexico. And so I've updated it for May. There's some pretty interesting stuff in here. So we'll go through what's happened to employment in New Mexico, how different industries have been affected. It definitely hasn't impacted industries all the same. So there's a lot of variability there. So that's interesting to look at. Also, the personal income data has shown a lot, especially that kind of indicates what's happening with the stimulus impact. I know that was something that you guys were interested in. So has been some new data that's came out. It does indicate some of the things that are happening around the stimulus programs. And then this last part on gross receipts. It's some of the research you've been doing at Arrowhead is trying to dig into the gross receipts data that's available in New Mexico. It's really specific data for locations and industries and can give some pretty unique insights. So to get started, as far as employment, in March 2020, 11.7% of all jobs in New Mexico were lost. That was over 100,000 jobs. Since then, through March 2021, 35% have came back. Nationally, 63% of the jobs lost in March 2020 have came back. So you can see that New Mexico is lagging behind other states in terms of the recovery. And there's a couple reasons for this. Some of it is that we do depend on tourism and also oil and gas. It could be slowing things down. You can see here that, as you expect from the last numbers, unemployment in New Mexico is not falling as quickly as the national rate. So the national unemployment rate is in blue. So that spiked higher immediately and then started to come down faster. And one thing that was pretty concerning for New Mexico is that March and February, the unemployment rate remained unchanged, whereas nationally you're still seeing the unemployment rate come down. In terms of comparison to other states, New Mexico is ranking 49th here. The only state that's recovering jobs more slowly is Hawaii. So you can see how that stacks up. And through March 2021, only Idaho and Utah have fully recovered jobs lost from March 2020. In terms of industries, so this kind of shows what is happening here. Steep declines in leisure and hospitality, as you'd expect. Local government, I believe that does include the K through 12 teachers, has been declining quite a bit. Mining and logging, that includes the oil and gas. Retail trade has rebounded very quickly. Let me go into the interactive chart so you can look at these a little more clearly. All right, so you guys can see the chart now, yeah. All right, so you can see health services, pretty steep decline here, but then it did recover to some extent. Professional business services decline. This local government, and this does include the K through 12 teachers, has continued to decline since that big shock was in March 2020. Leisure hospitality has had a steep decline, started to recover. You see retail trade is almost fully recovered. I think about 80 or 90% recovered since March 2020. Construction didn't decline too much, but is not fully recovered here. The other ones, mining and logging. So again, that's oil and gas, pretty steep decline. And so that was exacerbated by declining oil prices. And with the actual oil production in New Mexico hasn't fallen down too much. but the new drilling has slowed down, and that's where most of the jobs are created, in oil and gas. And so that has also hurt the recovery in New Mexico. This is another look at employment by industry. So you can see here how many jobs are lost right away. So you can see the one that lost the most was leisure hospitality. 57% recovered. There's still 17,000 jobs missing there. The local government, like we saw in that chart, the declines have accelerated since March 2020. So it's still been going down. So 14,000 jobs are missing from local government. Again, that includes the K through 12 teachers. Then you see mining and logging. So that's the oil and gas jobs. Again, the job losses have accelerated there. Have had a recovery in health services, professional business services. And then you can see construction pretty flat in terms of the recovery there. Retail trade, this is pretty interesting. 84% have been recovered.
That's good.
Yeah, so that's a good sign there. Yeah, and I think the state government also had some kind of accelerating job losses, but not as significant as the local government there. This personal income and stimulus impact. So what this chart here is showing is in blue is the transfer payment. So that's stuff coming from the government. The red is personal income without transfer payments per capita. So you can see, and these are per capita numbers. You can see here's March, it's in quarterly, so it kind of lines up with March 2020. You see a pretty steep decline, starting to recover, but then you see a huge spike in the transfer payments. So there definitely was extensive stimulus offer that did keep personal income from going negative. It doesn't necessarily mean this is true for everyone. And that's one of the things that we've seen with the pandemic is that it is affecting people in different industries or different circumstances differently. But as a whole, personal income did spike, including the transfer payments. It still has not recovered to the 2020 Q1 personal income level without transfer payments. And this is through, and this is specifically for New Mexico. So this data is through Q4 2020. Now looking at the national data, the data is available through Q1 2021. You can see it's pretty much exactly the same as the New Mexico chart, but you've seen that spike in the first quarter, which was from the most recent stimulus plan. And so, yeah, New Mexico is kind of mirroring the national economy here, and that's probably what we would see once the Q1 2021 data comes out for New Mexico. The most recent stimulus is expected to create 6 million total jobs this year. There were 3.5 million projected, or 2.5 million projected without the stimulus. So 3.5 million more. Just a rough calculation here. This is a very expensive jobs program, $542,000 per job. As a frame of reference, New Mexico generally doesn't, the state of New Mexico generally doesn't pay more than $10,000 per job in terms of incentives. Arrowhead has some programs that are less than $1,000 a job. The most recent stimulus wasn't all targeted at jobs, but this is a pretty hefty price tag per job. Especially when the average job's around $50,000 a year. Some news that did just come out, the jobs report that came out for April was, I think, one of the biggest disappointments compared to expectations ever seen. There's expected 1 million new jobs for April. Only 266,000 new jobs were posted. And one of the interesting things around this is it wasn't due to a lack of labor demand. So over here on the right, this NFIB jobs report shows that job openings are still at a record high for the third straight month. And so this has created some responses pretty rapidly. This just happened yesterday in New Mexico. They're reinstating the work search requirement for people on unemployment. So this did just change Um, and some of this is what they're expecting is that the extended unemployment benefits have slowed people coming back to work. All right, for the gross receipts data, so this is a unique data set for New Mexico. It provides business revenue data by location and industry. And so it's gathered through the gross receipts tax reporting. It's an important revenue source for state and local governments. So a lot of times they do try to project those. It's available within 2 to 3 months, so it's pretty current as well. And so this gives us a pretty good look at how businesses are doing in different industries. And we're working on a public dashboard. Right now, you can get pretty detailed spreadsheets to go through this. And we've been building a dashboard. So that's what these screenshots are from. And so I'll go through just a couple of things that we've been looking at, which are pretty interesting. And it does kind of show the trajectory of business revenues in some different areas and different industries. This is a pretty consistent trend. Going into the pandemic, gross receipts are up 20% year over year, January, February. So New Mexico was looking very good before the pandemic. And you can see this trend here where the black line is what 2019 looked like year over year. So from January to December. And the red line is 2020. And so you can see this gap here. This is that growth from the year before. And then March hits, and then it declines pretty significantly and doesn't necessarily even recover until the end of the year in terms of business revenues. So when you average it out for the whole year, statewide gross receipts declined 2.6%. And you can see some big gaps here in terms of just for over the previous year. For example, June 2020 was down $3 billion in terms of business revenue from 2019. Another look here is the top 10 industries in New Mexico in terms of gross receipts. So retail, trade, wholesale. One way to kind of see which ones were impacted is a rank change from 2019 to 2020. And so you can see other services, this mining sector, as you'd expect, the oil and gas, utilities moved up, healthcare moved up. And so we'll look through some of these. Oil and gas, this is looking at counties, 2020 to 2019, sorted as the biggest percent change downward. Curry County had a decline, I think that may have been unrelated to COVID-19. I think it was maybe a manufacturing facility that closed down. You can see Eddy and Lea County, oil and gas dependent. So is Union County to some extent. Pretty steep declines in terms of gross receipts. I mean, $4 billion lower in Eddy County, $3.2 billion lower in Lea County. Some counties grew gross receipts in 2020. Luna County, Roosevelt, Torrance. Have to dig into those counties a little more to see what exactly was happening differently there. The arts, entertainment, recreation sector across New Mexico was impacted pretty severely. So you can see the black line is what happened in 2019, and then the red line is 2020. So it started the year up and then really steep declines. I mean, more than a 50% decline year over year in April 2020. Mining sector, which is the oil and gas sector, heavily impacted. So you can see this trend here. Started the year up and then pretty steep decline here. Just for October, down 400 million in gross receipts across the state in oil and gas. Accommodations and food services, so you can see that dropped really rapidly, but you do see kind of a quick recovery. I mean, this may have been as restaurants adapted to doing online ordering and things like that. So you did have some recovery, but still down quite a bit. Revenues for restaurants across the state in June were down about 130 million. Looking at Dunn County, it's growing significantly year over year before the pandemic. So we can see that here with this red line versus 2019, up pretty significantly, and then ended up kind of repeating 2019. But this is a pretty big gap here. And this was the increase. So year over year in March, gross receipts for Dunn County businesses were up almost $200 million before then kind of dropping down. Big decline, and these ones kind of stood out. Big declines in information wholesale trade sector. So you could say information dropped June. Yeah, I'm not sure what this was about, but it kind of jumped out when we were looking at the comparison of industries. Wholesale trade, I think this may include some agriculture products, which might be, this looks like kind of a harvest type season, much lower. Bernalillo County was pretty stable, but not necessarily growing. Big declines in certain industries. So Bernalillo County, arts, entertainment, recreation. You can see how that kind of trajectory worked out for the year. Big declines. This is Eddy County, all industries. So you can see they had pretty large declines here, and then it kind of mirrors what you see for Eddy County mining, which is the oil and gas. So that's kind of what it looked like there. McKinley County did have some very severe lockdowns, and you can see kind of how that impacted them. They ended up pretty much significantly lower than they were the prior year in terms of gross receipts for businesses. Santa Fe Arts, Recreation, Entertainment. So this is an important sector for New Mexico. Santa Fe definitely. And a lot of the festivals that were closed down over the summer. So you can see that gap here in terms of business revenues in those areas. And so some conclusions. The impact of COVID-19 on New Mexico economy has been severe. It does vary greatly by industry and county. And we're interested in doing more research to understand what's driving these specific cases. The speed of recovery also varies greatly by industry. Long-term or permanent damage may or may not exist. The economy is definitely growing before the pandemic. So it'll be interesting to see how these industries come back as the recovery continues. And so just some things we're interested in looking at, targeted efforts to address some of the most impacted areas, and things that can be done to help with that recovery. And so that's all I got. Any questions?
Well, thank you very much. What do you see as the biggest growth potential in New Mexico, say over the next 10 years?
In terms of industry?
Well, the economy in general.
I mean, the state is pretty focused on film. That's a big area there.
What is?
The film industry.
Oh, yeah. Oh.
Yeah. The state is focused on that. The pandemic's kind of shaken up a lot of those plans and strategies there. But finding ways to compete with the surrounding states in terms of population and job growth, Arizona, Colorado, and Texas have all been doing very well. I think there are opportunities to kind of grow industries that are moving out of some other states like California. But being able to compete with the other states, I think, is an important thing.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, the health industry is going to, we're getting more and more old people come here like myself. Yeah. It seems like that's doing pretty well, isn't it?
Yeah, it's hard to say. Let me see if I can find the data from before the pandemic to see how that was growing. Got it right here. Another one that's been highlighted quite a bit is value-added agriculture, and kind of moving down the supply chain on that, do more value-added activities. Let's see, health services. Yeah, so in terms of employment, you can see health services growing. In terms of that's actually the largest sector.
Yeah.
In New Mexico, so that's true there.
Anyone else have a question, comment?
I believe it was said something about obviously the local economies or the local government number was changed a lot. And I believe you said this was seen in jobs in education. I assume that was K through 12 primarily. can you expand on that a little bit? What were those what kind of jobs were those in education?
Yeah, I think those are because just looking at these different categories, educational services, I think this is the universities. But I think they put the K through 12 educators under this local government. So that was my that's what I think is going on there. I don't know if there has been significant layoffs in other parts of local government.
Okay, so that is a possibility, but not you don't have the data actually in here other than the gross numbers on money.
Yeah, what I have seen is that it comes from the BLS, the Bureau of Labor Services, and they in some places they do break out local government excluding educational services, and sometimes they have it including educational services. So that's what makes me think that they just have the one number for New Mexico that they are including the educational services that would differ from the ones that are down here. But again, without having that broken out separately, I can't tell for sure.
Yeah, but it just makes sense that is, because that really was affected, K through 12.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Anyone else? Question, comment?
Well, I have disappointing number that we just heard in that everybody expected jobs to come back, about around 1 million growth, and then only a quarter of that actually materialized, and that some economists think that the holdup is that people can't find daycare for their children, or the kids can't go back to school yet full time.
Mm-hmm.
And then if they themselves go back to work, they're going to have someone to supervise the kids that have then to stay home and do distant learning. So have you run across anything that kind of has anybody put a plan in that will put daycare workers back, or has set up a plan of supervising kids in any other places, put jobs in that,
Yeah, it does vary by state.
Resolving that puzzle piece first.
Yeah, that makes sense. It'd be interesting to look at the different states that have different policies to see how that's affected. As far as I know, daycares have been open, but they've been, packed. So there's not as much. So there's still kind of probably a shortage for daycare, even while the schools have been closed.
Yeah, especially since we can't inoculate little kids yet. They're not on the list of getting shots yet. So,
do you think the unemployment benefits that we got, there's on the conservative side, they figure that, we're just giving too much unemployment benefits out there, and they don't want to go back to work. What's your comment on that?
I have heard that. I have noticed, I've heard from some businesses locally that have not been able to get their employees back for those reasons. So, it is kind of a balancing act, I guess, between are there the job opportunities? The data does show that there are job openings, whether those are the right job openings or whether there are other things impeding people from going back to work. It's hard to say. It does appear at least some people are not going back to work because the unemployment benefits are pretty rich.
Yeah.
Are there any large companies in New Mexico that have on-site daycare? Do you know about?
Not sure. No.
Oh, okay.
I don't think so. I could be wrong, but I just don't think so. In bigger organizations, that's true, but I don't think in New Mexico that's common. I may be wrong.
Huh.
No, NMSU doesn't. They do have daycare on campus, but it's not for employees.
It's not for the people that work there.
I have a general question, and forgive me for not being better informed about your organization, but what is Arrowhead? What does it do? What's its mission?
Yeah, sure. I should have probably went over that. We're the economic development arm of NMSU. So most of what we do is economic development programs, and they're primarily around entrepreneurship and innovation. And so when you think of economic development, there's kind of two ways to do it. It's attraction, so bringing businesses in from other places, or helping grow businesses in the area. And we mainly focus on entrepreneurship and helping businesses grow in the area. We run programs all across the state to support the land grant mission of NMSU. Some of our biggest programs, the Studio G program, actually a world ranked university business incubator. We were ranked top 20 in the world by UBI Global in 2019. That program has over 1,000 active ventures in it, and we're at 18 schools throughout New Mexico. We also run the Sprint programs, are open to local businesses and different industries. Those are really active, and those are good opportunities for local businesses. We help people get grant proposals, the SBIR, Small Business Innovation Research Grants. And basically, we kind of try to identify opportunities that we can help entrepreneurs develop their businesses and grow. And so that's kind of the main strategy behind all the programs that we do offer.
Yeah, when I was teaching at the university, I had a chance with interacting with some startup businesses, and I sent them to you guys, and they were very happy with what the advice they received. Now,
Awesome.
Arrowhead doesn't provide money; it provides connections with people that can provide. Isn't that correct?
We do have some programs that have some funding attached to them, but most of the money raised by our clients, we do help them find, elsewhere. Within the last couple of years that we have launched the Arrowhead Innovation Fund, which is a $2 million venture capital fund. So that one is a separate entity than Arrowhead, but it is an investment capital for businesses.
What would you say Arrowhead's biggest success is in terms of promoting the development of economic opportunities in the state?
In terms of jobs or funding raised, or?
Yeah, well, in terms of value added to the economy, however you operationalize that.
Yeah, there's probably some of the biggest impacts. The Arrowhead also manages the Arrowhead Park, which is on the kind of that south side of campus between 10 and 25, kind of shaped like an arrowhead. And so the Arrowhead Early College High Schools went in there. The Burrell College of Osteopathic Medicines went in there. Some specific clients, the one we've worked with a lot, Hatch Chili Store. They sell a lot of direct to consumer chili, and they're in several hundred retail stores throughout the country. We've helped them win 3 USDA value-added producer grants. So that's $750,000. So that one's a big success. There's Preston Mitchell is a great entrepreneur that we've worked with.
Yeah, there was an article in today's paper, as a matter of fact, in regard to Boberg, who was very, over some time, had to help develop the Arrowhead philosophy and economic development, and also was very much involved in getting Burrell College
Mhm.
And also the high school is a spinoff. I know when I was teaching, we increasingly got high school students from Arrowhead attending the university, getting early college degrees.
Mhm. Yeah, that's
So-
been great to have.
So, I mean, I have to say, I've mentioned this one time before that I'm really beginning to learn why economics is the dismal science, because it seems every time we have an economist or somebody with a strong economics background, the data they present is pretty dismal and pretty discouraging. And no offense to you, sir, but this report is pretty discouraging too. I mean, I love it here in this state. I'm like Paul, I'm a retiree, and I think that it's a fabulous place to live. But it's really distressing to me to see New Mexico always scraping the bottom of the totem pole when it comes to any number of measures of economic well-being, educational well-being, health and physical well-being, and we just learned that we're one of the states that has grown the least amount in the country with the terms of the last the census data. How the heck are we ever going to be able to attract real economic drivers if we don't take a holistic approach to dealing with some of these problems? And I have no idea what the solutions to these are. I'm not smart enough to to even begin to imagine what they could be. But is anybody trying to look at the full panoply of issues and try to tackle them in some sort of a coordinated way?
Yeah, there are people looking at this. I mean, if I was here January or February 2020, I probably would have given a better report, I think, in terms of the economy. New Mexico was doing very well going into the pandemic, which, some of the charts coming out of the Great Recession, New Mexico came back very slowly, but had started to kind of turn the corner. Oil and gas has helped significantly in the state, especially with the state budgets. And so, yeah, I mean, there are those issues around rankings for education and things like that that I think do make it hard to attract businesses. Some issues around the available workforce is an issue attracting businesses as well. But there are a lot of successes that have happened. I don't know how much you guys have followed the Santa Teresa documentary. Lots of really interesting businesses have went in there. The Stampede Meats, that was over 1,000 jobs that got added. Avita played a big role in getting them there. One of the guys there, Eric Montgomery, he won Economic Developer of the Year for that particular a business attracted. And so there's actually some unique value-added opportunities with that area because you do have the railroads, you do have the ability to go across the border north and south through Santa Teresa. The pitch they're doing now is to try to get containers coming into Long Beach and LA to have them actually warehouse and kind of break things apart in Santa Teresa, because rather than unpacking and warehousing in Southern California, which is pretty expensive, just bring it here and you still get access north and east from there. And in some cases, it may even be cheaper to bring it out here and then bring it back to California for goods and services. So, I mean, there is a lot of interesting stuff there. I mean, it is competitive though around with the nearby states. So it will be interesting, the strategies that are going to be formulated coming out of this. The state economic development department did just put out a bid for a long-term study strategy for New Mexico. They ended up going with SRI International, and I think that will probably produce a public report, which I'm hoping will be a good long-term strategy for New Mexico. As far as looking at advantages on how you attract people to New Mexico, I mean, focusing on the advantages I think is important, and then identifying ways to improve those other options. I mean, one example might be the public education system is not ranked very well. But I mean, is there something New Mexico could do to offer additional, K through 12 educational options, and being more open to those kind of things? Maybe that could fix some of those things. But you kind of got to look at each one of those problems one at a time and try to address those. And then some of them it is like, chicken or the egg, which comes first, and figuring out the best strategy. So, the pandemic really did kind of throw a wrench in it. Things did look like they were going very well before the pandemic. And so that's one of the things we're trying to keep an eye on, is what is permanent damage and what is going to snap back pretty quickly. That's been one of the things that's been debated is, was the pandemic more like a disaster that when things go back to normal, it snaps back, which is what you usually see after like a hurricane or something like that. Or is it something that's going to change the structure of the economy forever? And so I guess that we'll see what happens.
Dave, did you have a question?
Yeah, I had a question. It was mentioned that, if you viewed the, I guess, various big investments recently for the CARES Act and so on, that the number was like, I think it was $540,000 per job created or something.
Yeah.
Is that, I mean, two parts of it. One, I've seen this in other things like people sponsoring an expansion of an airport or something, and they say this is going to add jobs.
Mm-hmm.
Does the time horizon for this expenditure match a typical, if you say this, because this wasn't all jobs, at least as I understand the number.
Yeah.
And part of it was a rather unique investment in public health kind of things. So is that 540 some thousand just uniquely for job recovery, or does that encompass all the possible pieces of this?
Yeah, it's just a rough calculation. I took the, so 6 million jobs are projected to be added this year. They're saying 3.5 million are in response to that $1.9 trillion plan. So 1.9 trillion divided by 3.5 million.
Oh,
And it is an annual thing. And I think some of the stimulus, that 1.9 trillion, will be spent in future years. But just overall, it's a pretty high number per job. Some of it, I mean, they're calling it stimulus, but a lot of it's almost like relief, more so than stimulus.
yeah, because you could seemingly also take a different spin on it and say how many lives were saved if you spend $100,000 on whatever.
Yeah.
For example, when we lost 500,000 people, you could run a number on that and say, what does it cost to save a life as well, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there is some that that's kind of the macroeconomic debate right now, is it too much, or is it warranted to do big stimulus projects? The Federal Reserve has stated a goal of having inflation, and when you look at a lot of these a lot of the effects from the pandemic are very deflationary, and it's almost like to offset that requires pretty massive spending. Deflation would be a really bad problem for a country with that has so much debt as we do. So that seems to be the strategy they're taking, is even if it is an excessive amount of stimulus, it's better than the alternative of not doing enough.
Thank you.
Yeah, Charlie, did you have a question?
Yeah, sort of related to that. That's an easy calculation for that 540,000, and maybe doesn't have a whole lot of detail in it. Is there anything similar to that for the Arrowhead Center, where you would take the number of jobs that you feel responsible for and figure out the cost per job?
Yeah, we've done that for various programs. I used to run the Studio G program, so I'm pretty familiar with that. That one was typically under $1,000 per job.
It's a lot different.
Yeah, you see some, and this is, you can kind of compare the incentives. New Mexico, through some of their LEDA programs, they typically won't pay more than $10,000 per job in terms of incentives. And they'll do that for Facebook comes and sometimes they'll do the top end there, but usually $8,500 to $10,000 seems to be a reasonable amount. But like when they had that, New York was bidding on the headquarters 2 for Amazon. I think they were paying around $100,000 per job in terms of incentives. And so sometimes it does get pretty extravagant, but some places really need the jobs, and that's what they value them at.
How about the aerospace industry? I mean, we have the spaceport up the road and things of that sort. So what kind of an impact has it had on our economy, and what is the anticipated impact of what its potential might be?
Yeah, that one's one that's really interesting. I know probably the most demanded graduates, I've heard this before, out of NMSU are the aerospace engineering graduates. They're not always staying in state. There is some planned expansion in the Arrowhead Park with some aerospace engineering, which I think will be really exciting. So, it's definitely a growth industry. It's a question of whether it'll locate here or somewhere else, but it's definitely an industry to focus on. I would definitely agree with that. And you do have some unique things around New Mexico, particularly Las Cruces, with the White Sands Missile Range and the protected airspace, and then the UAV test facility too. So that's been, something that looks like a competitive advantage for a long time. It will be interesting to see how that develops, but I think there is potential there.
Any other comments, questions? Anyone? Anyway. Yeah, I was hoping to have Jim Peach on, but he didn't make it. I was going to have put him on the spot. He said he would be.
Oh yeah.
I've got one more question. I'm sorry. With a couple of us old timers here have mentioned the fact that we are indeed old timers. I'm wondering what the data suggests about what our value added is to the economy. Paul tends to focus on that we're a resource drain because we're old and decrepit and we need lots of resources. And I keep thinking about how much money I'm spending, and how much time I'm devoting to volunteer activities and things like that. So, do you have any information about the value added of retirees and whether or not we may be an untapped source of opportunity for the well-being of the state, and could maybe even attract lots of young people to come take care of us?
I was just thinking of the Charlie Munger was talking about at one time about why would you do anything to kind of drive out rich old people from an area, so you should try to structure it in a way that is attractive. Not committing crimes probably, and all kinds of spending money and stuff like that. So yeah, definitely there's a boost to the economy there. And so that is something to look at. I mean, what could New Mexico do to make it more attractive for retirees? It does kind of change sometimes economic developers will look at the age structure, and that kind of, it does kind of look like New Mexico's got kind of a hollowed out middle of that age structure with a lot of young people and then old people too. And so that sometimes forecasts how things are going to change going forward. But if you do continue to bring in new retirees, then maybe that starts to look more the same. I mean, some people might look at problems around that, but there's also a lot of opportunities too. And so I think focusing on those is probably the best strategy.
Yeah, well, we have become, I know some people that have moved here that I golf with, and they've looked at Arizona and California, and they looked at the cost of building a home or buying a home and so forth. And boy, we fall into a good category from that standpoint.
Yeah, definitely.
And so, yeah, I think being a strong retirement community is not a bad thing from an economic standpoint.
Yeah, definitely. A lot of things that, we look at are base jobs versus non-base jobs. So like a base industry will take in money from somewhere else. Just like if you're going to make a household more wealthy, you need to kind of go outside the house to bring money in. Same thing for communities and states. And so base jobs are some of those things that really drive the economy, and retirees are bringing income from somewhere else into the state. So that's definitely a value add to the economy.
One thing I was involved with recently, and they asked me to provide them some advice. If you see any advantage for having a state public bank so that we can, rather than working with just big national banks or international banks, do you think there's any advantage in having a state public bank?
Interesting. I do know, it's especially for like mortgages and car loans, it is a lot of the local banks that people go through. Even if you work with a big national bank for loans or financing, sometimes they'll, put you on the phone somewhere out of state. So they're not even really processing those loans in town. So, yeah, I haven't looked at that specific one about a state public bank. Some of the ones that are used are like community development banks. That's sometimes used to finance community development projects. There is some of the National Finance Authority, I think, does like transportation projects and stuff in New Mexico. But yeah, it'd be interesting to look at if there is some gap in financing that could be addressed by another institution.
Okay, anyone else?
We just got the news that the birth rate this past year went down in the United States.
Yeah.
Wouldn't you think that is a good thing, since the cost of educating all these little children would then go down, since nobody wants to invest, for example, in daycare and schools and stuff, since that seems to be what this country doesn't want to do, and kind of like puts that off onto the individual families that apparently can't afford it. But on the other hand, then everybody is going like, oh no, our birth rate is going down. What do you think about that?
Well, I don't think it's a good thing. This kind of gets debated on the population optimist pessimist debate.
What?
I think it was Adam Smith had that quote of kind of one of the best indicators of if area is doing well is you're seeing the population grow. You actually look at some of the areas in Europe that have population declines, or even look at small communities that start to have population declines. It does not get better for them as that happens. So I would say it's concerning.
Then why, on the other hand, doesn't everybody invest in the small children as a community or country?
Yeah, I would think that makes a lot of sense, definitely. We'll see how that child tax credit, what did provide a big boost. That was one thing that did come out of that rescue plan. That's a pretty significant increase. But yeah, I think
the cost of childcare, that's a drop in the bucket.
Yeah.
No,
it's a lot of money to raise children. It was cheaper when we raised our children than it is today. There's no question about it.
Well, having grown up in Germany, that is different planet. Yeah. Uh,
Understood.
yeah, definitely. But also the other thing I wanted to bring up, since Dave mentioned that a lot of the retired folk that are so graciously donating their time and volunteering, does that not then kind of take jobs away from people that would otherwise have, kind of would have to be employed by those businesses that kind of need that manpower?
I would kind of look at it as that if you have retirees that are spending money, it's additional revenue for businesses. That's probably the way I would look at it.
Yeah, I think retired people coming here, they bring their, like in my case, I retired from the federal or government and World Bank. And the money that I get in my retirement, I spent here in New Mexico.
Certainly. No, I'm looking at like that volunteer work in organizations.
Yeah.
That's
Oh,
time,
yeah.
that's time you put in there, that's if you didn't do it, if that work still would have to be done, and it would
Yeah,
have to be
interesting.
done by an unemployed person, kind of thing.
Yeah.
If we have in this state so many people that are underemployed, let's put it that way,
Mhm.
Are you, by volunteering, taking somebody's job away? Because obviously there's work to be done.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, you have to look too at where the volunteer work is being done and whether or not,
I think so, yes.
yeah, whether there would be demand for that they would be able to, an organization would even be able to pay for. So, it's yeah, so,
True, yes.
I think a lot of the volunteer work that retirees do wouldn't be done otherwise.
Oh,
right.
you think it would not exist at all?
Yeah, it just wouldn't be taken care of, whether it's helping out immigrants or whatever. Just wouldn't happen. That's the way I
Okay.
feel anyway.
Yeah. I mean, you could look at it as the volunteer
Yeah.
work is volunteer because it's not work they could afford to employ somebody for, but
Yeah.
it is a value add to the community.
Oh, definitely, it's definitely a value added, no question.
Mhm.
Well, we're getting close to the end of our time. We try to keep it to an hour. And anyway, I want to mention next week, in fact, my neighbor, Kelly Jamison, she's the public information officer for the Las Cruces Public Schools. And she's going to talk about keeping minds open when schools are closed. And that should be a very interesting topic. And so hopefully we'll have a good crowd next Sunday. Anyone else have a message for us before we leave?
Thanks very much for your time.
Thank you. Great questions. Yeah. Thanks for having me. Yeah.
Thanks.
Kramer,
Thanks a lot.
thank you very much.
Thank
It was
you.
well done.
Appreciate it.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great one. Happy Mother's
Alrighty.
Day.
Happy Mother's
Happy
Day.
Mother's
Thanks.
Day.
Thanks, Sarah.
Yes, you bet.